After 491 days held in Russian detention, Evan Gershkovich had to wait just another brief moment before being greeted on American soil. In the dark of night on the Maryland tarmac, the brightest of moments. For Evan's mother, Ella, at last, the tightest of hugs. Paul Whelan, nearly 6 years in prison, met by President Biden, who removed the American flag pin on his lapel and gave it to the former Marine. Alsu Kurmasheva, held since last October, embraced by her husband and daughters. Her youngest, Miriam, turns 13 today. The family can all celebrate together. These three among 16 people swapped with Russia in the biggest prisoner exchange since the end of the Cold War.
You know, it didn't feel real until we were flying over England. I'm a British citizen, Irish citizen, Canadian, and American. So as we came over England and I looked down, that's when it became real.
Over in Moscow, the red carpet for Vladimir Putin and the 8 Russian prisoners returned. Key among them, the man in the cap, Vladimir Kara, an agent of the FSB, the successor of the KGB. He'd been convicted of an assassination in Germany in 2019, and Putin wanted him back. Also part of the swap, these 2 Russian spies arrested in Slovenia, a pair so undercover as an Argentinian couple that their children didn't even know they were Russian until this moment, with Putin greeting them in Spanish, saying Buenos noches. The Russian leader said they would all be nominated for state awards. That the Kremlin can elevate these individuals to heroes was part of the difficulty of negotiations. The United States had to convince its allies to release them, and Biden praised their sacrifice.
Toughest call on this one for other countries, because I asked them to do some things that were against their immediate self-interest, and really very difficult for them to do, particularly Germany and Slovenia.
It emerged that the pivotal phone call with Slovenia's leader took place 2 weeks ago while Biden had COVID, and just an hour and a half later, he announced he wasn't running for re-election. And so this moment could help cement the president's foreign policy legacy. Alexei Navalny's family should have been here. He was meant to be part of the original swap until his death in February. Other Russian opposition activists were released, including Andrei Pivovarov, Ilya Yashin, and Vladimir Kara Murza, who said he had refused to sign a document admitting his guilt.
I don't consider Mr. Putin to be a legitimate president of my country. I consider him to be a dictator, a usurper, and a murderer. And I'm not going to sign any petitions for mercy to him.
He was told by an FSB agent that he would never return to Russia.
I don't only believe, I know that I'll be back in my home country. And it'll be much quicker than you think.
Men speaking their mind and tasting freedom, something tragically denied to Navalny, and the hundreds of other political prisoners still held inside Russia, with the freed Americans reminding the world of those left behind. Now the diplomacy is over, but the politics here has begun. Donald Trump, who earlier this year said only he could return Evan Gershkovich, he's now criticized this deal, saying if he had done it, you wouldn't have had to return anyone to Russia. That was rubbish by the White House, who said, look, the reason why this deal took place was because Joe Biden has such a good relationship with America's traditional allies, and that wouldn't be possible under a Donald Trump America First agenda. But if Biden sees this as a foreign policy win that cements his legacy, he still has a long way to go, because remember, this deal doesn't change things on the Ukrainian battlefield. America is still providing funds and aid to Kyiv to fight against Moscow. That war has no end in sight, and what might happen there if Donald Trump comes in. And of course, Biden's still hoping to try and get that Gaza ceasefire. And so as complex as this agreement has been, there are still many more difficult foreign policy issues for this Biden administration to grapple with in its final months.
Kieran Moodley in Washington. Well, The Guardian's global affairs correspondent Andrew Roth, who spent many years reporting from Moscow, was one of the first to greet Evan Gershkovich when he arrived back in the US last night, and he joins us now. What did you say? How is he?
Yeah, I mean, we were all wondering, and that was the big question when he got off the plane, was how Evan would look, after such a long period. And I think that everybody was just struck, and I guess I was struck, having worked with him before, by how much it felt like he had, the kind of personality and the humor and the nonchalance that that he had back in Moscow when he walked off the plane, and he greeted his family and he greeted President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. And at the same time, he just had this incredibly driven moment where he spoke with us about his desire to speak about Russian political prisoners and the hundreds of people who are still left behind in Russian jails.
What did he say about that?
What he said was that for the last month, when he was in Russia, he was in jail in Yekaterinburg, and that he was in a jail that particularly had political prisoners, people of different stripes, not necessarily supporters of the opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, but all kinds of people who, for their political beliefs, for their opposition to the government, were in prison. And he said that we don't know who they are, but that should become something that's known. And so he said that in the coming weeks and months that he really wants to speak about that a lot more. You know, you got a sense that he came out of prison with a sense of purpose, a sense of mission, and I think that I was just really struck by that, and so was everybody who was standing with us.
Yes, I mean, it's impossible to go through something like this without it changing you. But I mean, do you think it changes what he does now? I mean, you know, is he able to be a journalist now, or you know, has this defined what he now becomes?
Well, I think I'm not going to speculate what he's going to do next. I mean, that's up to him, and you know, it's not something that I would want to speak to. But I do get the sense that, you know, he deeply believes in the principles of journalism. It was the work that he was doing in Russia right up until the point that he was arrested in March of last year, and he was doing that, you know, under great pressure and at extreme risk to himself. And you know, it shows that I think his principles are very strong, and I imagine that going forward, it's something that he'll keep doing. But he will have a strong voice, I think, on this issue, and I think that he definitely has something to say after spending more than 490 days in a Russian prison.
As a Russia expert yourself, then, I mean, what do you make of what's happened and where it leaves Russia? I mean, you know, people like Bill Browder have been saying this will mean Russia takes more hostages. You know, ordinary people shouldn't travel to Russia anymore. What would you make of those sorts of arguments?
Well, I think it shows that, yeah, there is a sense of an ability and a willingness to do these kinds of very large deals on the U.S. side, and the Russians have shown that they're also willing to as well. You know, as your correspondent said before, this is the part where the politics is going to begin. And, you know, I've been speaking, and other people have as well, with people who are very supportive of this deal. There are other people who are going to come out and say that this could, you know, entice other governments to do similar in the future. And so I think that, you know, for the policy that's going to be in the U.S. going forward, there's going to be a huge question about just what, you know, the largest basically deal since the Cold War is going to send. You've seen the pictures overnight from Russia. And the Kremlin is obviously also going to try to show that they've, you know, gotten back people that Vladimir Putin has been looking for a long time. But I think the Biden administration has come out with a very forceful, you know, statement of it was important to bring these people back. It was a decision made in each of these countries in terms of who was returned to Russia, and that these are the values that we kind of have to move forward with. So it's a very controversial topic. It's one that obviously, you know, will continue to be debated. But I think that in Russia, they'll definitely be using the people they return to try to show that they've made the correct move, and we'll have to see what happens going forward.